I'm Will Chamberlain.
I'm Amber Duke.
I'm Ben Weingarten.
I'm Inez Stepman.
And this is NatCon Squad, where common good and common sense meet. NatCon Squad is produced by the Edmund Burke Foundation, the home for national conservatism. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, today we're going to be talking about the presidential debate that happened when we're recording this. It happened last night. We'll be talking about a variety of themes, and I think it's going to make up the bulk of what we talk about today, looking at how the candidates performed, what the likely impact is, should Trump agree to another debate. We'll also talk about the moderators and the abysmal performance of that. But I think first we'll just start with like initial reactions to the debate. I think that's the best way to go forward. And I'll give mine, and then everybody can give what they thought as well. So my initial reaction to the debate, I thought that it was mostly pretty even. I think that basically the way I prefer it is that Trump was higher variance. He had the best moments in the debate in terms of having good zingers, but he also got drawn into debate and got angrier than the other people. And I did coach debate, and one of the things I learned is that you can usually tell who's winning a debate by just even if you put it on mute, you can usually tell who's winning a debate just based on how people are responding. And I thought Trump was a little more off. That said, I thought Kamala was weakest at the very beginning of the debate. Her answers were, especially her first answer, where she just brazenly ignored the very first question on the state of the economy and just went off on a spiel. So I thought she was particularly weak early on, but I think she settled in. She got better as the night went on. The topics got more unfavorable towards Trump, and also the moderators got more and more aggressive towards him. So I thought overall, if I'm scoring the debate on points, I think I'd give her a slight edge. But there were still a lot of problems that she was dealing with. I mean, one, she was, the failure to respond quickly to questions and respond on point. It was so obvious that I think it hurt her. And also, I thought her facial reactions were terrible. She was acting super smug and smirking in a really awkward way when Trump was talking. And I think it was very off-putting. And I don't think it did her any favors. And I guess my medium-term takeaway is that I don't think this will have too much impact on the race. This isn't like the first debate where Joe Biden gave what is genuinely the worst debate performance in presidential history. This isn't that. I would think it would be weird to put them more than about a letter grade apart in terms of their performances. And I think ultimately this will be gone from the news cycle in 48 hours. But I'll kick it out to you guys. What do you guys think?
Well, maybe I'll say the things that people I hope to be convinced out of the importance of this debate. I did think it mattered because of the way that this election is being run, right? Because of Kamala being swapped in this late, because we have this much, much shorter window in which to actually pressure her on essentially lying about her entire record. And I mean, you're right that Trump had a couple good zingers. One of them was the MAGA hat zinger, right? We're going to send Kamala a MAGA hat because she's basically flip-flopped on all of these positions, but she's never going to be pushed on those flip-flops outside of the direct debate context because of the media. And so I thought Trump needed a W here and didn't get it because, frankly, there was a very obvious plan on Kamala's side. I agree with all the critiques, Will, that you said of her performance. I thought she was stiff. She obviously was memorizing her answers. You could tell because the pauses when she was giving those answers were in very unnatural places, like somebody who's literally reciting a script, right? And so I don't think it was because Kamala performed so spectacularly well, although I don't think she fell on her face completely. But rather there was this very obviously planned way of getting around this very important issue of all of her positions on the issues that voters say are the most important to them, right? They started off with immigration, the economy. There's just such a bad record there, not just from the Biden administration, but from everything that Kamala has said and done leading up to her becoming vice president. And the plan was to sandwich a bunch of very important lies about her record on the border, about her record on immigration, on the economy, and then at the end or the beginning, throw in some kind of distracting little annoying lie that was going to get under Donald Trump's skin about his crowd sizes, about the amount of money that his father left to him, about his court cases, right? About the comments in Charlottesville, rehashing the lies about what he did and didn't say in Charlottesville. All these little things that, yes, like are lies and are annoying, and I can see how they're annoying. But then Donald Trump would give 2 to 5 minutes on that, right? On that small question, rather than using that time to push her on the bigger lies that she had said in that same answer, that to me were much more important to communicate to the voter. Because again, those, like, pushing her on those issues and what her actual record is, for example, on the border, is not going to happen in the next, whatever it is, 50 days from the media, because they've checked that box. She's debated, she's done an 18-minute interview, and now they have a blank check to just reprint what she says now versus her entire record and never push her on it. So I think this is not so much that Donald Trump or that Kamala got a W, is that Donald Trump didn't get he missed a very critical opportunity to push her on her actual record in a way that, because structurally, both with the swapping in of Kamala late and because of the obvious bias of the media, the American voter who's just tuning in after Labor Day is not going to understand or have anyone highlight the fact that what Kamala says now is totally and completely a lie about all of the most critical issues and about where she stands on them. So to me, that was the biggest disappointment of this debate.
Missed opportunity is the way that I would describe it for Trump as well. Again, Kamala didn't perform that well. She just basically met the low expectations. But Trump, when she had her belly exposed on these really key issues, didn't go for the jugular. I mean, how do you go through an entire debate where you bring up immigration multiple times and you don't talk about Jocelyn Nungary and Rachel Morin? Like, that's so obvious. How do you not bring up the 13 Gold Star families that you just did a ceremony with at Arlington National Cemetery and force Kamala Harris to defend her tweet where she criticized Trump for actually spending time with these families, trying to get into the minutia of whether or not he was allowed to take photographs, which was entirely missing the point. And how did he not get from Kamala ousting Biden to what has been mentioned by him before, which is actually covering up for his cognitive state, lying to the American people about his ability to be president and who is actually running the presidency right now. And then he waited until his closing remarks to make the point that everything Kamala is saying she's going to do, she had the opportunity to do for the last 3.5 years and hasn't done it. That needs to be at the beginning of the debate in the opening statement, when most of the people who plan to watch the debate are still tuning in, not just in the closing remarks. There were just so many moments where he got sidetracked. He was trying to say too many things at one time and never really landed a knockout punch quite effectively enough. And so I also felt that this was a huge missed opportunity for Trump in what could have been, I think, a very handily won debate.
So going into this debate, I thought this could potentially be of disproportionate significance, not decisive necessarily in how the election would go, but obviously of outsized importance almost definitionally, because Kamala Harris has not done interviews. She hasn't taken freewheeling questions. She never had to win a debate in the primary. She never had to win a primary, a vote in the primary, and beyond. So there was an opportunity here for her to either crash and burn on the one hand, or on the other hand, have a really stirring performance that would look even better against the backdrop of no real record in this campaign, essentially. And I walked out of last night, and I'll probably echo some of the takeaways that you all had, but I walked out with a fundamental question, and that we'll address probably in sort of the next block of, did any voters change their minds after observing what they observed? And my gut sense is no. And actually, interestingly, the messaging from regime media seems to be that actually, despite what regime media thinks, undecideds actually look more favorably at Donald Trump after what transpired. But primary question and primary way to evaluate, I think, who won or what was the impact is who would have been on the fence that was moved after last night. And I'm just not sure that anyone was necessarily moved. Donald Trump is the most exposed known public figure probably in American political history at this point. Did anyone change their views of Kamala Harris? Wow, she's going to be exceptional on the economy, or she's truly presidential after seeing what transpired last night? I don't think so. And conversely, did people see some deficiencies in Donald Trump that they never saw before, or upsides that they hadn't seen before? I don't really think so. But all that said, within the kind of confines of the 90 minutes, I think my takeaways were that I agree if you were looking at the aesthetic, Kamala looked bad in terms of her smarminess, condescension, the contempt that she showed. She couldn't really contain herself, which is funny because regime media takeaways last night, if you watch the pundits after the debate, were saying Trump was so angry, he was screaming, etc. But you look at his facial expressions, and by contrast, he was pretty reserved relative to what Kamala, how she responded when he raised different issues. But that said, despite her condescension, her lying, obfuscation, evasion, and frankly, and I haven't read the transcript in full yet, but my takeaway in real time was basically her answers were fluff. They were vibes, they were feelings. There was no substance behind them. It was just words. And at the end of the day, will voters factor that in versus the substance of the 4 years of Trump policies and the 3+ years of Biden-Harris policies? I guess we'll see. But that said, she created the appearance of being emotional on certain issues and standing with voters on certain issues. Maybe that resonated, or maybe it was seen as fake and rehearsed. Not really sure at this point, and I guess we'll see, kind of what the polling shows after the fact. But that said, did she create the appearance of kind of the minimum of, is this a legitimate candidate for president? Is this someone who could potentially be viable? Based on the low bar that was set, I think her campaign would probably say yes. She didn't look out of place on stage, even though she couldn't actually respond to Will's point, the very first question, which was essentially, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Couldn't answer that straight away. Couldn't answer why the economy would be better under her. Couldn't answer anything with respect to immigration. Couldn't explain the flip-flops on fracking. Says she's a gun owner and wants to tout the endorsements of all manner of Republicans that used to be literally Hitler to Democrats. Very interesting, obviously. But of course, she didn't really take any fire from the moderators on that. And while Trump did pose the question to her on what do you think about abortion at 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, it was incumbent upon him, in my view, to ask all the questions the moderators refused to ask. And there were so many of them on these issues. He got to it, as Amber noted in the closing, about essentially you had 3.5 years to do all these things. You didn't do them. So what is this new way forward that you speak of? But there were obviously any number of opportunities that I think all of us wish President Trump could have taken. He could have pummeled Kamala more concisely, I think, and more decisively on any number of issues. But on the other hand, he did, I think one intelligent thing that he did was he continually returned to immigration and energy/fracking and the economy, all issues where he polls better than her, all issues that are of outsized importance relative to the ones that the moderators focused on, namely January 6th. Obviously, abortion, which is an important issue, but still in the ranks of voters is not in the top 2 or 3. Climate change, race and identity, all manner of issues where he could have used jujitsu to turn it back. First of all, attacking the moderators for not asking the questions that Americans care about, but then also turning them around on Kamala Harris. You want to talk about bigotry and racism. Let's talk about the pro-Hamas riots that your party is essentially behind in all these campuses and cities across the country. Or let's talk about the fact that DEI, in the name of anti-racism, is racist and does divide us on every single fundamental basis. And I judge people on their merits. Obviously, we would have loved to see those retorts on a whole slew of issues. We would have loved to see the former president not let Kamala and the moderators set the terms of debate by responding to every single assertion that they made. It was notable, for example, I thought he was going to get under Kamala's skin talking about her father, the Marxist professor. And I do think it got under her skin, but he continued to go on instead of goading her and baiting her into getting emotional over that and responding. She knew when not to take the bait, I think. He believed that he could both respond to the punches that were landed on him and get back to his main point. But I think the shrewder tact would have been, in many instances, there's no upside to fighting on their ground. Explain to the audience, your moderators in league with my opponent are on the same team. They're trying to elevate issues that they think are going to win with the voters. But I care about what you care about, America. And those are these 3 issues. And the other side's terrible on these issues. And here are the numbers to back it up. And do you want 40 years of what you had before, where we had peace and prosperity? Or do you want the chaos and calamity of my opponent? And, you know, had he been able to prosecute the case that way, I think it would have been a more decisive victory. I think it would have been compelling. And I think she would have been a bit shell-shocked. It didn't play out that way. But at the end of the day, I still walk away thinking, yes, there were opportunities that were missed. Yes, Kamala Harris, I guess, showed that she had some standing to be on that stage. But did anything fundamentally change? I don't think so, but we'll have to look at what the polls show and I guess what the money flows show in the days ahead to see if there's any indicator one way or the other.
Yeah, I think I want to hit on this point that people are making, which I thought was interesting and is true, right? Basically, Kamala had this strategy clearly developed with her prep team, which was to bait Trump and throw out bait, especially whenever she got a question on a topic that she saw as a weakness for her campaign. So it was, in particular, she got a border question. And the moment she got a border question, she started talking about Trump's rallies, Trump saying crazy things at rallies, and how people were leaving them. Right. That sounds like George Conway was there and telling her what to say about, like, this will really piss Trump off if you say Trump's rallies aren't popular. And lo and behold, it worked beautifully, because instead of coming right back at her and saying, why are you talking about my rallies when this is a border question and you open the border, you know, going back to that thing, he's like, no, first let me talk about the rallies. Like, he fell right in. And what I saw there was, in terms of preparation, Kamala was better prepared for this than Trump was. Like, I don't think Trump really did much practice. My understanding is he did very little practice for the debate with Biden. I don't think he took seriously the notion. I think he had it in his head somehow that, like, this would be somewhat similar to the Biden debate, that, you know, it wouldn't be that tough. And I think he probably underestimated Kamala a little bit. And, you know, but we talk about Kamala's weaknesses, but I think, you know, this is sort of, I want to kind of bridge to, you know, should Trump agree to another debate here? Because I have a thesis that says, no, this should be Trump's last debate. This should be the end of that. My reasoning is, I don't think the next debate will go better. I think if there's another debate, it will go worse. And the reason I think that is that Kamala's mistakes are fixable by a good coaching team. Trump's errors are a lot harder to fix. Kamala's mistakes were facial expressions and failure to directly respond to questions. Those were like the two, I would categorize as like the two big obvious errors. Like, first off, you can fix facial expressions. You know, if in prep you just throw something at somebody whenever they give an awkward smirk, they quickly stop doing it. You know, they don't allow props, which is tricky. I mean, the ideal circumstance would be I would give Kamala notes and tell her to look down at her notes while Trump was speaking so that she wouldn't do anything about it, or she wouldn't make any awkward expressions. And then in terms of interruptions, that's an easy fix, where she just needs to, if she's asked like a yes, no question, she should just say yes or no and then move on to her spiel, rather than so obviously rejecting the question and kind of annoying people. But Trump's problem is this, like, getting baited and knowing that he's going to get baited and then still just falling into it and getting emotional. I'm not sure how to fix that. Like, if I had time to practice with him, maybe I could like work on it, but he just doesn't. He's a 78-year-old man. I don't think he's that coachable on this stuff. And he's done a million debates. So I don't think this went that badly for Trump. I think, as y'all are saying, there's a bunch of missed opportunities, but that doesn't mean I think he should try it again and try and fix those. I think Kamala will come back with a better strategy. She's demonstrated she's coachable, as demonstrated by the fact that she effectively used bait on questions that were difficult for her. And I think if she comes back, she'll improve a lot. A lot of, I think, her weaknesses come from she hasn't done a debate in a long time, and she was a little nervous coming out of the gate. I don't know what do you guys think about that? Do you think Trump should take another debate?
I guess I have the exact opposite sense as you do, Will. And I have no idea which one of us is right. This is like one of those gut check moments. My sense is that Kamala's weaknesses that you accurately described are very much baked into who she is. I don't think she's coachable into being more natural. I think she was coached to the gills this time, and to some extent, this is as good as it gets because it's never going to become more natural, right? And to the extent that I think she did not do well last night, it was in that unnaturalness of her answers, besides the obvious lying. But then I just take it sadly for granted that a lot of people will not have the background to know when she's lying and when she isn't, which was most of the debate, right? And so to me, like, if Trump gets another bite at the apple, there's only upside for him. I don't think that his performance, quote unquote, turns people away, because as we've been saying, everything is baked in with Trump. Like the fact that he might go rambling off on something, or all of those things I don't think are really turning away voters. But the problem here is that if the media is allowed to set the line for Kamala, like they have been, they've basically been running her campaign for the last month, where it's going to be a campaign based on vibes, first and foremost. And second of all, they're going to uncritically run her, statements now. Not even say, I don't even want to say statements, because half the time she won't even give a clear statement about a changed policy, right? But they will run statements from her surrogates saying that this is actually her policy on fracking, on the economy, on the border, right? And the only way in that media environment to ever get out the message that this is not who Kamala actually is, and this is not how she's governed herself as a politician or somebody with power for the last decades, is for Trump and Vance to push on those things in a live setting where the interference, and I know we're going to get to the moderators in a minute, but like where the interference is at least, overcomable directly by them live in front of the American people. And I don't know whether that'll tip the election or not, but my overwhelming gut sense is that case needs to be made to the American voter, and it's not going to happen outside of these debate settings, which is why I think this is a missed opportunity, which is why I think, like, if he gets another shot at it, he should take it and try to prosecute, to use Kamala's favorite phrase, right, to prosecute that case better, because there are going to be a lot of voters who think Kamala sounds kind of moderate and sensible. And somebody needs to put in front of the American voters, here are all the things she has said and done specifically that completely blow up and contradict the case that she's trying to make for herself and that the media is trying to make for her, which is based on some of the most blatant lies that I've ever, like, even in the media environment, even in the, political environment in which we've been in for the last 20 years. Like, the only thing that comes close to this, in my view, is the way that Gavin Newsom lies on the national stage about what is happening in California. I mean, she directly contradicts herself on the most important points of policy and of ideology and worldview and perspective over and over again. She clearly has no contrapunction about just flatlining, not trying to like massage the truth, not trying to like spin the way that we're used to politicians spinning, right? But just like, she doesn't have a core, and she just says whatever she thinks the sentence that is the best response that will convince the most voters according to her team and her internal polling. And somebody needs to prosecute the case against that. And I just haven't seen, I mean, I really hope that happens, because I just haven't seen the campaign really prosecuted. And this was a huge missed opportunity in that sense. Finally, person that I see prosecuting that case well is JD Vance in the media, that he's taking all of these interviews, and maybe we can get into that, but like, he is the only person who is forcing through jujitsu with all of these interviews that he's taking, is forcing some of these issues into mainstream coverage. And I think he's doing a really great job at that, but it would sure help if on the national debate stage, Donald Trump, the principal, would prosecute that case. And yeah, that was a long-winded way of saying I have probably the opposite instincts as you do, Will. And I think if he gets a second opportunity at a debate, he absolutely should take it, because I don't see what could happen to him that would be worse at this point. Like, it is really just about missing an opportunity to score a point rather than losing a point yourself. So in that situation, I don't see why you don't take the shot, right?
I tend to agree with Inez. I think Trump's negatives are so baked in at this point that a what's considered a bad debate performance is not really that detrimental for his campaign. Whereas a bad debate performance for Kamala, where 40% of voters went into this first debate saying they wanted to know more about where she actually stands on the issues, could actually be a complete killer for her chances of getting elected. And so the potential downside for Kamala is so much bigger than for Trump, and the potential for upside for both of them is quite high. I think just from that strategic standpoint, it makes sense for Trump to go again. I feel like he performed better in the second debate against Hillary Clinton in 2016 than he did in the first debate, and people were more kind of prepared for his aggressive style at that point, and he was able to go a bit harder on her and really make some of those points, whether policy or character assassinations, that just really landed in a way that they didn't in that first fight. And Kamala cannot be coached into erasing the policy flip-flops. She can be coached into maybe explaining them, but every aspect of her campaign so far has been dedicated to avoiding having to do that, and really avoiding even addressing the fact that those policies have changed in the first place. So I don't see her coming into the second debate offering voters any more clarity on why she's made these massive shifts from 2019 to 2024. Whereas Trump had the bones of prosecuting a case, as Inez put it, against Kamala. He mentioned the fact that she abandoned her position on fracking and that he should send her a MAGA hat. He mentioned the fact that she's been in office for 3.5 years and hasn't done any of the things that she promised. He mentioned her policies on the border and the economy being worse for the American people compared to when he was in office. He mentioned her being involved in the coup to oust Joe Biden. It's just a matter of stringing those things together and making it very clear that she is a radical, but she's also a political opportunist, and she will hide her radical positions until she gets in a position of power, because she knows that she needs to do that to win. I don't think it's that far of a leap for Trump to get there, even if he still gets baited a little bit or gets distracted by some of these ego type questions that were presented by both Kamala and the ABC moderators. It's still a long enough period of time in a live debate setting for him to get through those points and still prosecute the case against Kamala. I don't think it has to be an either or, luckily.
Yeah, can't he just like learn to say the one thing, she's lying about my crowd sizes, but that's not
right.
What's
just truncate it a bit.
Right, like just say one half sentence about
right. It doesn't have to be 2 minutes long.
She's lying about the money that my dad gave me, but the border. Like he needs to learn to do that, because I understand why he wants to address it. I actually, like, very human way, understand when somebody lies about something that's obviously very important to him, right? Like the fact that people are not leaving his rallies, it just drives him nuts, and I can understand that, but he has to do it in half a sentence and then just move on and say that's not what's important. This is what's important, is what she's lying about, the things that actually, because he was kind of confirming her obvious rehearsed point, which was like, Donald Trump doesn't care about you, which is a direct hit at, I think, his strongest argument that he's always had, which is they're coming after me because they hate you, right? And it was an attempt to undermine that very like strong argument that Donald has worked for Donald Trump since 2015, right? And I think he kind of validated that argument a little bit, because she would talk about the issues that are impacting the American voters very, very strongly, the economy, the border, everything else we've been talking about. But then he would go just for the thing that was about his ego. And I don't know, that it was driving me crazy. It was very depressing for me watching this, honestly.
One elephant in the room, though, that we haven't addressed is the fact that Kamala's team came out right after and said they want to do another debate. Now, I think some people have perceived that as she's hyper competent and she's daring Donald Trump to get up there again. But I don't know. I mean, if they thought that she did the minimum necessary to exceed expectations, if they thought that last night went well, wouldn't they say this campaign is over? We prosecuted our case. We've got the candidate who has the momentum. There's zero upside to debating Donald Trump again. it seemed interesting to me. I would not have expected them to take that posture if they were actually confident. That strikes me as a position you would take if you felt you needed another debate. And I think what has been articulated here is you all feel that Donald Trump needs to better articulate why Kamala would be a disaster. And it's kind of a remarkable assertion because we're basically saying there is no media here. So it's incumbent upon Donald Trump to reveal Kamala Harris's record and the distortions. And obviously candidates have to do that, but it's never been to this level before because you have someone who never ran a campaign and was installed, 50 plus days ago, and has a protective bubble around her. And I think the logic makes sense in the way of like Donald Trump is an open book. He's known, people are hardened in their views of him. They know his record. They know what his positions are going to be essentially. So there can only be wins essentially gained by pummeling her. I get that logic, but it just strikes me as interesting that her side offered to debate again and wanted to debate again. What do you guys make of that?
Yeah, I think, to me, that's a confirmation of my thesis of the world. They want to debate again because they think she did, one, they think she did fine. They're not scared of putting her out there again. And two, they think she'll do even better. That's, I think, that if I were sitting in the Kamala camp, that's what I would be saying. I'm saying that went what I would say we won. We didn't win massive, but we won. And the things that went wrong, we can fix easily. So that's my perspective. And if you're the Kamala team, I think your perspective. Like if I was advising Kamala, I'd be saying the same thing. Like we should be pushing for another one and make him duck out of the next one because it will go worse for him next time. You will look better. He will look. And I mean, every plan we had in terms of baiting him worked to perfection. And we should expect that they'll work again because the guy doesn't like to prepare.
The only other just aside that I would make is I always try to be careful in evaluating debates, for example, to step back and also have the humility to discount our views. I think it's significant because like we're in this space, we watch this all the time. We're going to grade our side very harshly. So that said, how last night came off to most viewers and to the very small percentage of undecided, so-called undecideds, and I always think that the number of undecideds is vastly overstated because I think most people know in their hearts where they stand, especially on known candidates. We probably have to some extent, discount our views a little bit based upon the fact that we're deeply in the weeds on these issues, and most viewers probably are not.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to second what Ben said. I have no idea if my gut instincts are like aligned with the American voter or the swing voter in this case. I really have given up on that in the last 8 to 10 years. So I mean, Will could be completely right, and it's just my gut instinct on this. But that being said, I obviously I agree with myself, but I have a certain amount of humility about, and I think that is really important what Ben just said. Like you have to, especially those of us who are even like our audience here, who if you're listening to NatCon Squad podcast, you are not the average voter in the United States. So I think we have to have a lot of humility about where our instincts are versus where the average American voters are.
Yeah, and I'd love to jump in here on sort of what the public sentiment seems to be so far, because we do have a couple of snap polls that came out since the debate last night. I'll start with the CNN poll because that's most likely to probably be biased towards Democrats. So the CNN reaction had 63% saying Kamala won and 37% saying Trump won, which is actually an underperformance by Kamala Harris because in the first debate between Trump and Hillary, they had Hillary winning with 62 and Trump at 27. So a much larger gap there. And then importantly, the CNN poll actually had voters, they had 2-point gain for Trump on who voters trust more on the economy and a 2-point deficit for Kamala Harris. But then if we look at JL Partners, which is probably a little more capable of polling voters from across the spectrum, they actually specifically asked independent voters what they thought of the debate. And they found that 49% of those surveyed said that Harris won versus 43% who said that Trump won. So only a 6 percentage point difference there. And they gave Trump the victory on the economy, the border, foreign affairs, and Israel, whereas Harris won on abortion, healthcare, and democracy. And I don't think it's a secret to any of us which set of issues is higher on the list of issues that matter most to voters at this time. The one downside, I think, for Trump with these polls is that the independents' favorability rating of Kamala Harris jumped pretty significantly. She went up 10 percentage points in terms of her favorability versus unfavorability, net favorability rating, whereas Trump only went up 1 point. But I think overall, only 6% of independents saying that Kamala won over Trump does give some credence to Ben's theory that the Kamala campaign is a little bit nervous that they didn't do enough for voters to walk away feeling satisfied. James Johnson, who's the co-founder of JL Partners, said, quote, in response to all of this data, and this wasn't a knockout blow. The polls suggest her performance still left Americans in the dark about the content of her plans. On the issues, Trump led on the same areas he did with Biden in June. And if he's leading on the issues the same way he was with Biden in June, that's an edge to Trump.
Yeah, just one sentence about, because Amber brought up something really important that we haven't touched on. Trump's best part of this debate were the 15 minutes after he came back from break on foreign affairs. He had high energy. It was like the old Trump. You know, I thought that was the best part of his performance.
And on the merits, he crushes there. And if he had a line, you know, about how we're neither respected nor feared by anyone, and you see it in a Middle East exploding, and you see it in Russia on the march, and compare that to my presidency, where we had peace and stability and order in the world, and our enemy is at bay. You know, a simple, concise line. I think he really could have destroyed her in that area. And it's a shame that obviously there wasn't more national security and foreign policy, because I think it would have been a way up for him. But that's also probably why the moderators tried to stay away from it, and they just wanted to focus on Ukraine and, you know, trying to portray Trump as a traitor. But I would throw in also another wrinkle on sort of what is the voter sentiment in response to this, to the extent the debate swings people at all. The New York Times had a headline, pundits said Harris won the debate, undecided voters weren't so sure. And there's some pretty damning anecdotes in there, interviews from purported undecided voters with the New York Times, basically saying, you know, and in some instances, interesting cohorts that could be decisive for Trump, saying they're going behind him. There's also Reuters. And I mean, in some ways, you know, it's kind of an occupational hazard to draw any conclusions from an anecdotal sample size of 10. But Reuters did put out an article today saying Reuters interviewed 10 people who were still unsure how they were going to vote in the election before they watched the debate. And after the debate, 6 said they'd vote for Trump or were leaning Trump. 3 said they'd now vote for Harris, and 1 was still unsure. Question here is, and I always think this is a question you have to ask, why would the media put out messages that would seemingly be derogatory for the media's candidate? Is this a psyop? Are they playing games? Are they actually alarmed and they believe they need to fundraise more and that the campaign needs to get more aggressive? What do you guys make of the initial headlines after the debate?
I don't know. I wouldn't say they were that bad. I just thought they were what we were expected. I thought the media reaction is exactly what we expected. And I mean, their assessment doesn't feel that off. I kind of want to pivot. I want to pivot a little bit to the moderators. I know we wanted to talk about that some, but I think, you know, why did the media, I mean, the media came out and said what we would expect them to came out and say in a debate like this, where it wasn't obvious that the one candidate, you know, if Kamala had collapsed the same way that Biden collapsed, maybe they'd say something like that. But it was a competitive debate, so they're going to say she won. So I don't know if there's much you can read into that.
I just find it interesting. You would have thought they would have found anecdotes to show Kamala Harris swung all the undecided voters last night. It's surprising to me that they didn't cherry pick the interviewees they needed to generate the headlines they wanted.
Do you think they collected those people before the debate, though, and then we're kind of stuck with them?
Yeah, I mean, definitely possible. And I guess I wouldn't put it past them to actually do their job and be honest once in a while. But it still surprises me. And maybe it's a distrust but verified thing. But yeah, they could have been locked into their sample size and it hurt. I mean, we have seen, I guess, a couple clips that have gone pretty viral of, CNN interviewing. I think it was, black voters in Philadelphia who were critical of Kamala Harris, and not generating the headlines they wanted out of it. So maybe every once in a while they cherry pick the wrong sample for the headlines you'd think they'd want to generate. But I was genuinely surprised seeing some of these headlines today.
Yeah, I saw a clip from last night of an independent voter who said something like Kamala sounded good, but at the end of the day, the facts are the facts, and the facts are my life was better under Trump. And I think typically in those situations, they do have those people sort of standing by during the debate so that they can go right to them when it's over. I don't know if Reuters collects their sample size the same way, but my guess is if they couldn't cherry pick, that it was probably because they already had their field of interviewees prepared in advance.
Well, speaking of the baseline of media combination of incompetence and lying for their candidate, I mean, what did you guys think about the actual moderation of this debate? Because I mean, there's been a lot of chatter in our kind of circles about how bad and how biased the moderation was. And while there were some really obvious points where the media went back to the live quote unquote fact checking of Donald Trump in an incorrect way. That being said, I mean, I do feel like they gave him opportunities on the border, on immigration, on some of his stronger issues. So it does seem a bit like Coke to me to focus exclusively on the performance of the media. I guess like Ben, I feel like our distrust but verify attitude should be built in. Like we are running any campaign that Donald Trump runs is going to be in direct opposition to the media. This more so even than the previous ones, because in this case, there almost is no campaign from the Harris camp that isn't the media campaign for her, because of the last minute and because of Joe dropping out and all the crazy things that have happened in the last several months in our politics. They've really just taken on the job and the burden of dragging Kamala across the finish line. So, I mean, what did you guys think about the moderation of this debate? Was it unpredictably bad? Because I don't feel that it was unpredictably bad, even though it was bad.
Yeah. I was surprised. I thought, given how bad ABC's reputation was with the right, I thought that the moderators would try to have a little bit of self-respect. And I guess I was a little bit lulled a bit by the CNN debate where Jake Tapper and Dana Bash did a fair job and were trying to be objective. And I remember Sean Hannity moderating Newsom, DeSantis, and actually doing a pretty even-handed job, not really favoring DeSantis particularly much, even though DeSantis was a friend. So I thought, okay, ABC is clearly going to try the same thing. They don't want to have a reputation on the national stage as being these hacks. And then it went completely the other way. I mean, Candy Crowley in that Obama-Romney debate in 2012 interrupted once with one fact check. It was wrong, but she only did it once. I mean, Muir and Lindsay Davis, I think 6 interruptions or something in the neighborhood of that, 6 attempted fact checks, 0 on Kamala when Kamala was spewing all sorts of like actively debunked lies, Snopes debunked lies. It was appalling. One of the worst performances. And in some ways, I think it's actually a bigger part of the story. I think that a lot of people would have looked at the way those moderators behaved and just said, well, I hate this stuff. This is exactly why I never trust the media in the first place. They're clearly in the tank for Kamala. I don't think it actually helped her that much at the end of the day. Like Trump was able to respond to it reasonably well. And I think it just made the sort of setup of the thing look really bad. But again, it's hard for me to read the undecided voter at this point.
I was also surprised at how bad it was. I think the difference with Jake Tapper and Dana Bash is they are very sensitive to intramedia opinions and especially online opinions. Jake Tapper is sort of infamous for getting sassy in people's DMs when they write unflattering things about his reportage. And they were, I think, very careful with the way that they handled that debate between Trump and Biden because of that, because there was so much preemptive criticism about their bias. ABC clearly is not subject to the same type of external pressure and was more than willing to show their bias and how many times they fact checked Trump versus Kamala. I mean, it was just obvious. And then you have Abby Phillip from CNN tweeting, just FYI, when there is asymmetrical lying, there will be asymmetrical fact checking, which is an admission that she believes that Kamala did not lie a single time during the debate, because otherwise you would have a 6-to-1 or a 6-to-2 fact check ratio. It was 6-to-0. So her point just doesn't hold up under the facts of what actually happened during that debate. But I think even beyond the ratio of fact checking between Trump and Kamala, the bigger problem for me actually was that the somewhat challenging questions of Kamala were all about policy, whether it was the first question about whether or not voters were actually better off economically 4 years ago. She was asked, I think, at least once about the fracking flip-flop, although she has like 10 or 15 flip-flops that were not addressed. But all of the questions directed specifically to Trump were about made up things about what he said on January 6th, like claiming falsely that he only called for peace after they had been in the Capitol for 2 hours. It was falsely accusing him of flip-flopping on abortion. And all of these questions were either predicated on false premises, or they were about his character or his temperament. And these past scandals that have already been so overly litigated in the media that it was a waste of time for them to focus energy and time in a debate on those. Whereas the questions asked of Kamala were things that haven't been brought up before. So those are more legitimate. And it felt like they were intentionally trying to push Trump down a rabbit hole of getting him to relitigate things that are 4 years old, that have been talked about endlessly, that have literally been the subject of impeachment inquiries and impeachment probes, instead of actually addressing the issues that are on the table today. So even just the way the questions were asked, the way they were framed was a serious problem. And I think done deliberately to focus on Trump's basically to try to focus on his personality defects, as opposed to helping illuminate for voters the difference in policies between the two candidates.
I'm only surprised that people were stunned at the biases of the moderators. I mean, I agree they sort of unburdened Candy Crowley as being the most biased of all because it was just to the nth degree. And that could have worked in Donald Trump's favor. We'll see to what extent viewers cared about the 3-on-1 dynamic, and that overshadowed what might have been other gains for Kamala Harris or made Trump look a little more sympathetic. I think it was kind of interesting. I've always felt that, I think it was back in 2012 when Newt Gingrich sort of made the moderators the foes, that it was really an effective tactic. Obviously, fighting with the media, it has been part of Donald Trump's track record. It goes back to Nixon as being a compelling part of his tactics and strategy as well. I thought it was interesting that despite the 3-on-1 dynamic, Trump didn't really try to turn the moderators into the foes. I think had I been in his shoes, I probably would have sort of said, there you go again. You're trying to not only frame the issues, but pick the issues that you care about, but not that the American people care about, and that does a disservice to them. It almost seemed like he didn't want to play victim in any way to the moderators. And in some ways, he was even complimentary of them, which I thought was interesting. Maybe there's a reason behind it. Maybe he just wanted to play it straight. I thought there were opportunities, though, to say, essentially, this is Kamala's campaign asking questions of me and then saying, Kamala, please respond to it. But maybe he didn't want to go that tact. It'd be interesting to know if that was pre-planned or not, and it was improvisational. But this does raise the question of going forward. Like, why would you ever debate on this network? Why would you ever go in front of these people And obviously, you know, the compelling aspect of doing it is, well, first of all, if the other side won't debate on your turf ever, anything approximating your turf, because even what constitutes turf on the right is debatable, I think, then you have to go into the lion's den. And sometimes it can be probably favorable optically, if not substantively, to do so. But on the other hand, shouldn't candidates demand some level of reciprocity? And why would you have your worst political foes who are dedicated to destroying you allowed to question you as if they are quote unquote moderators? I mean, I put moderators in air quotes in everything I'd say around the debate that happened last night, because these weren't moderators. These were people on Kamala's side protecting her and trying to slander and destroy Donald Trump. So at the end of the day, again, I mean, this raises a broader question of how can you ever go on these networks? And again, maybe one upside is the dynamic of the 3-on-1 makes you sympathetic. Maybe you go into the lion's den and win. Maybe you feel you need to appeal to their audience, because even if you peel off just a small percentage of them, that's a W. But there has to be, at bare minimum, a demand of reciprocity, because what has transpired cycle after cycle, it defines insanity at the end of the day to put some of the most decisive minutes of an election in the hands of your worst political foes.
Yeah, just to add, obviously the Trump campaign does think the 3-on-1 angle is helpful, because the immediate email and the fundraising pitch that came out after the debate was, I won 3-on-1.
We're getting close on time. I guess I would, if we're doing final thoughts, although I know this is.
We can just go
this
ahead
says
and do
yes.
final thoughts.
Okay,
I think
great.
that's the right move here.
So we talked about whether or not Trump should do the second debate. I would ask the question, would he anyway, even if he should? And I think based on what we've heard, the answer is probably no, we're not going to get a second debate because of this moderator issue. I think the only debate Trump would agree to at this point is probably Fox News, but he did a Fox and Friends interview immediately following the debate where he said that he would not support having Martha McCallum and Brett Baer be the moderators, which are basically the only two like straight news anchors that Kamala Harris and her campaign would probably agree to. He suggested Jesse Waters or Sean Hannity, which again, Kamala campaign's never going to agree to that. So I just find it unlikely at this point that they're going to be able to agree on a venue, an outlet, and a set of moderators and a set of rules. There was already so much bickering over what ABC was going to do with the microphones. And then it appeared at the last minute that they decided that they were going to unmute the microphones at their own subjective will based on what they thought was newsworthy, which was bizarre and another issue with their moderation. But I don't see them being able to agree again. I don't think Trump should have agreed to ABC in the first place. And I said as much in the weeks leading up to the debate. And if he's not willing to go with the sort of midday news anchors on Fox, then I don't see how that gets resolved.
My final thought is just connected to something I mentioned in passing when we were talking about the debate, which is JD Vance and his interviews. He specifically, and I want to touch on something that he specifically said about the Springfield, Ohio situation, about the cat memes, the eating dogs and cats and ducks, as Donald Trump said in the debate, right? And you can see where the media, quote unquote, fact checking is going on this train. JD Vance gave a great answer to CNN, basically both pushing back against the idea that this is obviously debunked. It was one of the moments where the moderators felt that they needed to insert their fact checking. There isn't really a fact check on this. What we have are reports from residents, right? And JD Vance said that's basically, he said that's your guys' job, right? We have these stories coming out from residents. It's media's job to then go and investigate them, right? Instead of saying that they're quote unconfirmed. Well, like that's your job. You got to go out and confirm it or not, right? But overall, I don't think that this is going to work really well against this point. I think actually Aurora, Springfield, these are really great flashpoints for allowing Americans to discuss some of these problems that they're facing with the influx of migrants with influx of immigrants from various parts of the world, and the rapidity and lawlessness with which it's happening, even if it's technically allowed and encouraged by the Biden administration. I don't think this is really going to work on this particular issue because, to quote, what is it, Al Sharpton on Tawana Brawley, right? Even if it's fake, it's true. This is just a stand-in for essentially these completely culturally incompatible foreign practices. And again, we don't know that it's not true. What we have are reports from people in these towns that have yet to be like sort of run through beyond Facebook posts or beyond somebody on an interview saying this. That's the situation with a lot of these reports, specifically about eating pets or about grabbing waterfowl from the sort of duck pond, right? It's worth noting that the left has such a big problem normally with hunting according to like organized rules and with a permit, and they think that that's an uncouth practice, but grabbing a duck from a pond is apparently something that we should consider a blessing of diversity, right? But I think this is going to continue to be a flashpoint. I think there's a lot there for alternative or conservative media to dig into. You listen to the interviews with some of the people from Springfield, and it's actually not sensationalized, and it's very, very angering how it's being like gaslit and dismissed. Their concerns are being gaslit and dismissed by media as fake or sensationalized or whatever it is, because they're not just talking about pets being eaten. They're talking about their insurance rates going through the roof by hundreds of dollars because Springfield, Ohio has become this huge like what do you call it, like zip code where the car crash rate is so high that the insurers are their actuarial tables and the spreadsheets that they're using to charge rates, right, are going through the roof, and all the residents are impacted by that. There are people saying they can't get the city services that they really need, American citizens, because they're completely overwhelmed by these newcomers. You're talking about 20,000 people in the course of 2 years in a town of 50,000. You're talking about my 10-year-old granddaughter has one woman was saying, my 10-year-old granddaughter is in a classroom with a 16-year-old migrant because he doesn't speak English, so he's in the 10-year-old's class. Like, there's a safety issue there. I'm being followed at the grocery store. Like, these are people who very clearly do not know anything about the culture in which they've been dropped into and are causing very real chaos and havoc in this town that is just being completely callously dismissed. And I think it is emblematic of how a lot of Americans are feeling right now about immigration and about the lawlessness and about, again, covered with technical, lawful migration, right? But that makes it all the worse, the kind of second-class status that American citizens are having to take in these situations. Anyway, I think this is a very potent sort of issue for the right, for the Trump campaign to talk about. I think it'll continue to be. And I was really glad to see JD Vance not back off, not be sort of cowed by these technical fact checks about these stories. One saying they're far from unconfirmed. They're far from quote unquote false. We just don't know like anything that's spread by, email or on Facebook or whatever. We don't know the details and whether or not they will be confirmed. But they're representative of a very real phenomenon that towns across the country are dealing with in terms of immigration. I think it's something worth bringing up over and over and over again in the campaign and not being cowed by these like ostensible fact checks.
I'll talk about something entirely different for my parting shot, which is we're recording this on September 11, 2024, and the 23rd anniversary of the most tragic attack, most fatal attack on America in our nation's history. The fact that we're 23 years on and it's almost an afterthought, seems like almost an afterthought in the American psyche, is a staggering thing. I grew up 40 minutes from Lower Manhattan. My father was in Lower Manhattan that day, witnessed unspeakable things, came home covered in soot, detritus, and was lucky and thankfully survived, as did many of his colleagues, all of his colleagues. But when you witness something like that, it changes you. I think that 9/11 represented in some ways a national loss of innocence, certainly a loss of innocence personally for, a 13-year-old kid, in junior high. And it also, I think, had a formative impact on many of us in this movement, in our political orientation, in the issues that we care about. And I go back to a couple poignant thoughts always when it comes to 9/11, which are, it's a travesty, I think, that this day is not taken more seriously, remembered, considered, thought about. 9/11, in many ways that we don't even think about, looms over our daily existences in ways large and small, not only in terms of, all of the knock-on national security and foreign policy impacts that still loom over us today, but also from the perspective of the fact that the global war on terror, you can trace a direct line from the institutions, the bureaucracies, and the policies that were set up in its wake to the weaponization of the administrative state and the national security apparatus against Americans and the mission creep that transpired. And I think it's very hard to say, looking back, that we are in a better position as a country more than 20 years onward, which I think sadly validates the efforts of the jihadists. So the message that I kind of always come back to is, we have to deeply consider and learn the lessons of what transpired both on 9/11 and subsequent to it, learn from those failures and rectify them if we're going to honor the lives of those who fell.
Yeah. I'm reminded of from the debate how we had Kamala saying, like, God forbid we negotiate with the Taliban, and then she was negotiating with Hamas, right? That's like her proposal is a ceasefire with Hamas that would need to be negotiated. Yeah, I think I wanted to talk about what Inez was talking about, this Springfield thing. I think to follow up on it, there are a lot of Republicans, especially the usual suspects in terms of people like Jonah Goldberg, saying, oh, this is all fake. Oh, don't talk about this. It's like, no, absolutely not. We absolutely should be talking about it. Things that are not yet proven are not false. There's a big important distinction. We haven't proven some of these allegations true, but we have reports which are evidence, as much as people don't want to say it, like an eyewitness testimony is evidence. So somebody saying this happened to me is evidence, even if it's not proven yet. And I think, like, it just shows the utter lack of disregard even still intellectual Republicans often have for their flyover members of the party. All right. Anyway, on that, I think that'll do it. On behalf of Amber, Inez, and Ben, thanks for tuning in. I'm Will Chamberlain. See you at the next NatCon Squad.